himself.
You want to see my screen? I'm assuming you see it here, so we should be good to go. All right, so I'm Steve Nakata. I'm the Chief Architect of the Federal Group. Great to meet everyone. For this presentation, I wanted I'll get over here. Maybe I should just dive right in, given the time.
Yeah.
But we'll go ahead and get started here. We have a space thing, so we'll
I
launch.
love it. Love it.
So, as I think you guys might have seen in some of the promotional emails, people call me the Rocket Man because I am actually a former NASA systems engineer. In fact, I work at the Johnson Space Center and as in robotics research for the space station. But also worked on a spacecraft called Comet. And actually was a lift engineer for it, and so we built a satellite that was intended to orbit the Earth for 30 days and push back down. So a little bit of my early history in my career. But now I've been spending 20 plus years working with marketing technologies and helping organizations with MarTech. And also, and more recently, obviously, is helping to understand how to use AI for to facilitate marketing operations and making things more efficient, more productive, and all that. But as we all know, it's still in the early stages. So a lot of this stuff is at a very high level. What's the potential for AI agents? So we'll talk about why is it really coming to fruition now? And then what's the role of these AI agents? So I'm trying to, what I'll be painting for you is a big picture idea of like, this is how you should be thinking about AI agents. So you have some roadmap in front of you, right? And then we'll talk about how these agents can help facilitate campaign orchestration and also some strategies for how do you go about implementing AI agents. And then I'll do a live demo where I will show you how I've connected a custom GPT to both Marketo and HubSpot. And then we'll talk about first some steps you want to take to go down this path. Okay. Okay, and so the objectives here is to help you understand how these agents will transform how you actually perform marketing operations from not just being reactive, but being proactive, right? Because AI is going to provide all these capabilities. And then I'll show you how some of these agents could fit into the organization in terms of doing things like how do you evaluate ICP fit, how can you ensure you have content that's compliant, help you build campaigns, and then of course help you with QA. And through just practical manners, I'll show you how you can do some integrations. It's going to get a little technical, so I apologize for those of you who may not be as technical as others, but I'll just give you an idea what's possible. And then you'll see a demo of that there. I was just mentioning with using OpenAI's custom GPT connection. Because I don't know if you guys play around with custom GPTs, but there's a lot of capabilities it brings. It's a matter of, well, how do you actually make it put it to use? So I'll show you how I went about doing so. Okay. And so by the end of the session, hopefully you'll understand how you want to go about implementing AI agents for your stack and how you can get started. Okay. So let's talk about why AI agents matter now. You might have seen some of these charts. It's kind of parallels Scott Brinker's MarTech landscape, right? It's starting to get really crowded with different vendors and different tools. But what's really interesting is the fact that now there's a lot of these low-code, no-code tools, also frameworks on building things from scratch if that's necessary. But there's also it's always constantly new LLMs, right? LLMs being like OpenAI's, GPTs. Of course, Meta has their own, and of course overseas as well with DeepSeek and all that. So there's always something, almost like one-upmanship kind of thing going on, as you can imagine. But it also creates opportunities for bringing more capabilities at your fingertips. And so it's definitely a good time. And the fact that these tools are also making it easier to build agents, and but it's always a challenge of, well, how do I start, right? And so we'll talk about some of the things you should consider. But the thing is,
if you don't get started now, you're going to get left behind because someone else is going to be diving right in and learning this stuff. So I definitely want to encourage you to take the step if you haven't already. And just start playing it because it's pretty safe, relatively safe if you start small and not expect it to actually do everything for you on the other hand, because it's not quite there yet, right? Okay, so then I want to talk about painting a picture of what's the role of AI agents in terms of how do they help augment marketing operations. So think of AI agents as, again, following the space theme here, they're part of your mission, right? Is that you're like the mission commander and you'll have different mission specialists to help you do certain things because obviously right now you're expected to do everything yourself in many cases, as I can imagine. But it's all about how do you start to think about it in terms of building agents that are experts in their own right. And you'll see some of that here, but it's all about helping them get really good at what that small area of their role. But then how do you start to assemble all these agents with these specific roles? It's no different than your marketing operations team, right? Each person on the team is specialized in something, and AI agents should parallel that in that sense. In fact, I see AI agents as more of a helper to the different roles that you have in your team so that they could do more, focus on more of the strategic elements and have the AI agents help with the tactical elements. So it's definitely, as I say here, it's not a monolith. There's all these different tools. It's a matter of, well, don't try to do everything with one tool because it's not going to necessarily be good at just that one thing. So again, this also presents a challenge. It's like, well, how do I know which one I use? And sometimes you just have to try it and see if it works. I'm sure you guys have experienced with playing, like, for example, ChatGPT versus Gemini versus Perplexity versus Claude. Each is good at something and not as good as the others. In fact, I just saw an infographic this morning. Someone said, here's where you want to use this, here's where you want to use that. Similarly, you'll start to experience that with AI agents as well, at least in the tools. But it's all about, well, how do I get them to be specialized? And then how do I get to collaborate together, right? Because ultimately, the whole notion of what they call agentic AI, not just agents that are individually tasked, but working together to accomplish a particular objective. How's that going to work? And so you've got the specialization, but then there's the next piece is orchestration. It's no different than orchestrating a campaign. You want to orchestrate agents as well. And so so in the process, you want to make them have the ability to make decisions, safe decisions, of course. Yeah, you don't want them to make something that's going to has a high risk factor. So it's a matter of, well, low risk, let's let it automate the decisions. On high risk stuff, get the human in the loop. But along the way to agents, just like people, they're going to have this capability to learn. And so as the human element, one of the responsibility is for humans to continuously train these agents, course correct, et cetera, right? Be their QA agent in that sense. And because they learn through this process, and then they can reapply and make it an iterative and predictable along the way. So yeah, like I said here, it's always going to be evolving, and in some cases, some things might work out. But it's just part of the effort. Is, well, sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right? So it's a matter of being prepared for that, because as you know, there's always new tools popping out. So what may have worked today may not be the best thing tomorrow. So it's all about agility in that sense, right? But again, it's all about spending the time to understand and try and learn in the process yourself. Okay, so that's so to start off with, there's this notion of what I call the intake and assessment agents. They're kind of like the ChatGPT interface, right? It's some way for a human to communicate and take input. And it's a matter of then creating agents that can take the input, figure out, do I have enough information to do what I needed to do, and have that interactive session with the person or the requester in that sense. But then combine that with other agents who can then understand, well, what are they trying, what's the objective, and how do I break it into individual tasks, and then start to parcel it out to the other agents who are very specific, tailored to this specific task. right? So for example, one could be like ICP evaluation. It's like, does the request, and this is again in terms of like content, campaign execution. Is the request going to align with the ICP? Will it, is there proper alignment? Is there the resource available, et cetera, et cetera. So it's all about this, what sometimes called a traffic cop, making sure everything's there before we proceed. And it's also, again, make sure all the requirements are met. That if we need to go back to the human, that we do so. But it's ultimately the things we have to do as marketing operations, supporting marketers, right? Is that, do I have everything I need? Well, now you let the AI, train the AI agents to do that very thing. So that's one type of agent that I'm talking about here. Make sense? So another type of agent is data agents, right? They form the backbone. So because without good data, AI is not going to do anything no better than human. And that's one of the key elements with good AI is that you actually have good data in the first place. So these agents can help with that process. Things that we do with programs and data campaigns, et cetera. Now you can start to bring in data agents that can do it more comprehensively. It's not like you have to build all these decision steps right now, because with the AI agents and their capabilities, you don't have to spell out all these decision trees, if you will. It's now you can start to say, this is what I want to do. Let it figure out how it needs to go out and do it. So to that end, you have agents that can automate the orchestration. Where do they get the data from different sources if necessary, right? And how do I get it clean? How do I standardize it? Things we have to do very tactically today that AI agents and their capabilities will start to make it more holistic, more and less tactical in that sense, that you can be more strategic about how you go about and maintaining data quality and ultimately just make it more efficient in the process. It's also about having it bring in third-party data, just like, again, we do ourselves, but let it make the decisions on where to get the data, let you focus on things that are more strategic, because let's face it, that some of that stuff can get very mundane, I hate to say, but why do it yourself when an AI agent can do it for you, so you can focus on those higher level tasks. And also it allows for that continuous scoring of ICPs, right? Make sure ICPs are still aligned with your companion objectives and vice versa. So it's all about making it more proactive in many ways, that it's not leaving you to change the decision steps or what have you, that it can automatically pivot if, based on, of course, your ability, your monitoring its performance, et cetera, right? So it's all about just having that holistic aspects of managing almost like people, rather than all these tactical, change the flow here, change the flow there, do this, don't do that. Okay, so data agents. Now let's talk about content agents. And this is something that's probably more familiar with what you do with things like generative AI. It's all about generating content, right? So in that sense, there are a lot of AI, in fact, I think there's been a lot of stride in this particular area with AI tools that are out there, right? For like ensuring that there's the brand voice is, your content is aligned to the brand voice. And so in a lot of ways, this is one of the more mature areas, if you will, in AI. So I'm not gonna go through here and read all this, but it's all about having AI do the, make sure that it's on point with your brand, that stays with compliance, with legal content requirements, et cetera, right? Also, let it do the research for you, look for competitive information, look for, and let it do all the legwork, right? And turn around and help develop the content so that you're there to QA, course correct, what have you. But also then maintain that constant alignment with your ICPs that, okay, this someone might have a good idea or a new thought, but does it still align with the ICP? Or it could be, does the ICP need to change on the other hand, because there might be market conditions that have changed along the way. but it's all about reducing creation time, improving testing, and ultimately just being data driven, because that's everything's going to be derived from the data that these AI agents are going to be leveraging. So you got the data and you got the content. Now it's about execution, about running, building and launching the campaigns themselves, right? So things that you do day to day already, right? Program cloning and then configuring. Well, now instead of you doing all the pointing and clicking and potentially missing something, AI agents can do that for you. You can enable AI agents to do that for you. Again, it's to reduce the errors, but do it more quickly and consistently, right? So there's a lot of time savings already in there. It's also about building the assets that go into the campaigns themselves. How many times have you run into situations where, oh, that wasn't the right image to be used, or the right version for that matter? Well, now when you AI agents do that for you, there's that less risk of that happening, because it follows the rules very explicitly versus you remembering in the back of your head, because there's no mechanism to ensure that that's still the case. And like I said, it's then have it do the orchestration, build out the campaigns, make sure the triggers are there, and ensures that the flow again aligns to the objectives of the campaign, but also stays true to your business objectives, et cetera, right? And it's not just about email though, right? With AI agents, being able to communicate to AI agents that deal with other channels, then you can now do really true multi-channel implementation or orchestration without you having to go to each log into one screen, log into another. Now the agents, all that, they do all that work for you under the covers. So it's all about reducing what could take days to hours, and even maybe in some cases minutes. It just depends on the complexity of the particular campaign you want to execute. But then of course, be able to do so with minimal number of errors. And you can just imagine if AI is unable to do that, how quickly you can just execute on a campaign based on a request coming in from marketing. And of course, just like we have to do ourselves, there's always the notion of QA, continuous improvement, right? So you can have agents that are tasked to validate things that you normally would have to do yourself. You got to build an email, make sure all the links work, right? Well, now you can task an AI agent to do that. That is maintains a compliance with GDPR or whatever other compliance may be applicable to your vertical, test the deliverability, make sure the spam doesn't affect your spam scores, etc. And it could do so continuously, right? So this force you to monitor your reports, log in and check things, or worst case, something happened in the middle of the night somewhere on the other side of the world that you're still responsible as a global organization. Well, now you can have it be proactive and handle things that you otherwise would have to do in the middle of the night yourself. And just like other agents, there's always that continuous learning, right? It learns that something worked, something didn't work, how can I apply that, move it forward, right? And so it's just like people, but now it's letting the agents do that, continuously improve on their own. So kind of putting it all together, the spacecraft, AI spacecraft, if you will. So it all works together. It'll all work together, be interconnected, but there's always that human element, right? The human being the strategist, providing the direction, providing the oversight, setting the goals. But then you have the intake agents doing the capturing of the requirements, agents gathering the data and doing any enrichments, content agents doing the creatives, execution agents doing the setup and running it, and of course QA agents monitoring. So as you can see, it's all these different roles of agents working together, just like a marketing operations team. But now those tactical tasks are given to the agents to do for you, excuse me. So this is the framework that I apologize, it might be a little small, so but the idea is that you have these specialized roles within marketing operations that go with the category of roles, right? So like, I apologize, it might be a little small here, but the content, there's the marketing strategist type of role that helps the actual person, marketing strategist, with with defining the strategy, just like they may do already with the tools, but AI agents that's specifically trained on your business's strategies, your competitors' strategies for that matter, right? And to help, again, be the assistant to these marketing strategists. You have agents that do the content development, et cetera. So, and similarly with channel agents, you may have one agent that's all about strategies around emails to webinars to events to text messaging, whatever the case may be. Now you can start to have specialists that are very focused in understanding of the best way to leverage that channel. And then you have configuration agents that are specialized. But then you have different configuration agents. There's a team of Marketo specialists, team of HubSpot specialists, teams of Salesforce agents that are specialized in some element within the platform itself. And of course, data, it's not just one data agent, but there could be data agents that are specialized in maintaining data quality, another one for enriching data, et cetera, right? And then, but there's another set of people, if you will, that are going to be your AI DevOps, if you will, to help the specialists that are going to be the subject matters that are overseeing the agents themselves, while you still have someone or some team helping to maintain the AI agents themselves, right? Because the subject matter experts within their particular areas are more about the content. The DevOps are more about the infrastructure side of things. Make sense?
Mhm.
All right, so some use case examples, and I'll go through here. One example, and I'm actually taking the use cases from the Austin Marketer user group. I apologize, what's the gentleman's name?
Lucas.
Lucas, yeah. So actually, I wanted to just point out some of the great examples that I'm not going to go through in detail here. So it's definitely, I think it's a recording of that, and definitely we can include a link in the presentation. But there's things about like using like custom GPTs to generate code. In fact, in my case, I used ChatGPT just because some of the things I needed wasn't very too specialized. But then you can have custom GPTs to do like code generation, and his example, he was using a custom GPT to generate velocity scripts for Marketo, right? Especially scripts that are it's been trained on scripts that his organization use consistently. So rather than like digging through the program tokens and figure out where the scripts are, you built it into the custom GPT. So now it's readily at hand. It's using natural language to have it generate the script you actually need for what you're trying to accomplish. Another use case is an internal knowledge base, right? So you can have a GPT that's powered by RAG, return augmented generation, which is essentially, think of it as a library, but a library of your organization's information. It's a technique by which you can have a quicker recall. It's instead of sifting through your SharePoint, your Confluence, and everything, you put it into a retrieval augmented generation, a vector database. You can then use it in front end with a custom GPT to just have a conversation on getting that information without you having to dive through folders and folders of content and ultimately not finding the content you actually need, right? So that's another use case of making it easier to find things. And in fact, you'll see a lot of vendors use this for their knowledge base. That's actually how it's been built out with the implemented AI is to use RAG to make to store the information and make it readily available through an AI interface. This another example is a contact persona classification where a webhook, when it's triggered from a program or a campaign, it calls a custom GPT that's been trained or fine-tuned to do a categorization, in this case, of a persona. So in the example that was provided in that user group meeting, talked about having a set of ICP categories and pre-training a GPT to so that when, in this case, Marketo made a webhook call to the GPT, it passed along the person's title, then give it a category that the title should belong, and update the contact record. Make sense? And one of the cool things that they presented was the next best offer. It's all about it's a common problem as marketers is what's the next thing I should be presenting to the prospect or the customer, right? Based on their behavior. Well, now you can use automation combined with GPTs and in this scenario or use case, a middleware or an iPaaS platform like Zapier or Lumi to actually act as a middleman to pull to watch for something that comes from Marketo, call a custom GPT to do a lookup of, okay, these are the things, this is the current situation with this particular prospect. What should I do next? Right. So it's a pretty cool way to take your knowledge of what's been working or have it actually determine what's been working and then apply that for the next prospect that meets those criteria. And what I'll be showing here was about content reviews, right? So let's say that you have a lot of autonomous marketers creating content on and sending out emails. Well, one way to save you time and having to monitor the performance, if you will, is to have a content review tool to pull out the content that they've created, see if it aligns to the target audience that was intended, kind of notion, right? How well is it going to score based on that? And then you can also compare it to the actual performance of that campaign. Use that as a way to inform, well, did I get it right or did I predict it correctly? And then use that as a way to continuously improve or train that GPT to determine whether this next content will be spot on to that target ICP. And so before I actually start showing you the demo itself, I want to just talk to you about how it actually works. So it's in this case, it's using OpenAI's custom GPT connected to the Marketo or HubSpot's APIs. And there's important components to consider here. So again, we configured it with API content just to be able to access it in the first place. And then I'll show you how I can extract email content from the MOPs, and it's just like you do with ChatGPT. It's a conversation I'll have, and then I'll talk about, well, how do I make sure it doesn't do things poorly or really mess up the instance, if you will. Because given this is a prototype, I kept it really locked down and just made it read only for Marketo's sake, just because I didn't want to take a risk, even though it was a sandbox. Let's say I don't want to muck it up either. But no, I'll talk about some of the things that you can do when it starts to get into some of the more complex use cases where there's a higher risk of doing something wrong, right? But so I'll show you this part, and I'll jump into I'll switch screens here or windows here so you can see what I'm talking about here. So it's about connecting the custom GPT to Marketo. So Marketo's API requires what we call OAuth authentication each time you connect to it. So OpenAI's custom GPTs has what they call a fixed token, if you will, which doesn't work with Marketo's authentication mechanism. So to make this work, I actually had to build what I call a gateway, middleware, if you will, so that the custom GPT talks to the middleware, and the middleware actually does the authentication piece and ultimately extracts the data out of Marketo. So I used, in this case, render and run it with some very minimal Python code, and I'll show you what some of that looks like here. But you can use other tools like AWS gateways. You can use Azure, you can use Google Cloud Platforms tools as well. There's no one answer, right? But for my sake, I just kept it simple and used this Python on render as a way to do that. And then, of course, then connecting to Marketo. Okay. So let me see here. Okay. So if you have never worked in ChatGPT's custom GPTs, it's about creating a very specific GPT to do some task or set of tasks. So in this case, I connected it, before I run it, because the render, I'm using the free version, so I actually have to start it up again because it'll go to sleep. So let me just go in here, restart the service so it doesn't error out on me. Okay. So I also have a preset prompts, instructions, and so that I don't have to repeat some command or request constant. So for the sake of the demo, I want to keep it safe and make sure it works as expected. So in this case, I'm going to say, okay, review the contents of 5 emails of any statuses that were created by a particular admin, and create a table of its messaging, strategy, target, audience, calls to action. And in this case, it'll tell me this is what I'll do. And now it's talking. You can see here at the bottom, it's talking to that gateway I've set up, and I'll show you what that looks like here after it goes through them. But it's actually communicating, and then part of this delay might be just making a connection because I just restarted and then whoops, it made a connection, and it actually reached out and said I found this, and now it's kind of talking through what it's doing, as you can see here. So now it says, okay, I found this one. Here's the messaging strategy, target audience, call to action. Now it's going to the second email and going through doing the same thing. Now, as it's doing this, imagine if you had to do it yourself, logging in, reading through the email copy, how much time it's going to take, right?
I've done that. It's terrible.
Yeah,
It's terrible. So this is amazing.
Yeah. So, yeah, so it's pretty cool to watch it in action. But now I'm just asking it for some very specific things. But now when you start to think about, well, what else can I ask of the content? It kind of opens up a lot of possibilities, right? I just asked for messaging, strategy, target audience, just to see what it thinks of the content. And then you could go back to Mark and says, is this what you intended? Because my agent here is saying this is one thing. If the intent was something else, then that's an opportunity to have that conversation of, well, how do we ensure that the content performs better the next go around? Because the agent's helping you advise the marketer that, hey, we're this way. This is the way it interpreted. Let's see what we can do to change the content for the next iteration of this email. And then now to produce a nice little summary so you can see it here. Okay. So how this all works is this gateway thing. So this is Render, which is just basically a cloud service that I can upload code in this case. What that code looks like is here. Now, how I generated this code, I'm not a Python developer through and through, but I can code and I can read code, but I'm not good at ideating code. So what I did was, in fact, let me just go back here, open up. Actually use ChatGPT to at least get me started. So I apologize here, okay. Here's a long session I had, but it started off by saying, hey, outline how to configure. Another thing is I was still learning about custom GPTs. So I just said, fill me in on how do I make use of this thing, right? So I just asked it, how do I configure a custom GPT so I can make API calls to Marketo? And of course, I told it, being an architect, having worked with Marketo's APIs, I knew that it had to do OAuth authentication. So I kind of as part of the context of it understanding how to work with Marketo, I kind of informed it that, hey, I need to use this because I knew that with custom GPTs, it relied on static tokens, right? So I used this as a way to help minimize the back and forth I needed to have with the GPT, with ChatGPT, excuse me, in this case. So it goes through, and apologize if I go through it too fast, but then it starts to give me some sample code. Now, with custom GPTs, now I'll go show you some of where all this goes, but it has this notion of schema. This is just to tell custom GPT, how do I use that API? In this case, I limited, because Marketo and with any system, there's a whole slew of APIs. In this case, because I was prototyping, I limited to some very specific APIs, emails to extract, APIs to extract content, emails, and list emails, things of that nature. So and also just to keep it from trying to generate a whole lot of code too, right? I gave it very specific instructions to limit it. So it would then give me the sample code to drop into the GPT, and I'll show you where that goes here in a second. And then it talks about, well, how will the gateway work? Give me some tips, some gotchas, and some best practices. So as you can see, a lot of this is already new just because of my experience, but for someone new to this, it's really good about giving some tips about how to go about deploying it. And as you can see here, It's a lot of code. In the end, there were some back and forth I had to do, but ultimately, oops. This is the code, the final code that you can see I have version 0.1, 0.2 just for my sake of keeping track of it. But once I put it into, once I went and I used, I don't know if you guys use VS Code, that's where I took the code from ChatGPT and I dropped it in here so that then I could then run through and clean it up. Now with Python, actually, I didn't use it in this example, but there's a thing called notebooks. And because I'm forgetting the vendor that creates that provides a platform for it. But within notebooks, you can actually test snippets of code in real time to make sure that when it's doing this block of code, it's actually doing what you intended. So that's one way to test with Python. And that's a very Python specific way of developing. But here I can actually create the code. And actually what I ended up doing was I took sections of the code it actually generated, dropped it in here. But from here, then I can open up a terminal and actually execute it using the CPU locally. And again, if you're not familiar, to get through the learning curve of using Visual Studio Code or VS Code, actually just ask ChatGPT, okay, I want to do this, how do I do it? But also now with VS Code anyway, it has this agent mode that I can actually do it. Now, and I don't think they had this a few months ago, but now that it's built into here, I can actually open up a window here and actually chat with VS Code's own agent to help me with the code completion, etc. Yeah. So VS Code is the development tool that I use. And then I dropped it into dropped it into GitHub, which is the means by which Render pulls it into their platform. So I know I covered a lot of technical details. Let me just jump back to the session here. And let's just open this up so you can see how this all looks. So when you start a new GPT, there's several key components to consider, right? Of course, then the name, you want to give it a name and description. Now, there's a block here called instructions. Think of this as your prompt, your general prompt of giving it context of what you want this GPT to do. Right? So in this case, it needs to ask and also to tell it to or to train it on how to communicate with the user itself. So I'm saying here you need to ask for any relevant information to make the API calls and to make calls related to marketing automations, and also kind of gave it guardrails. Right? In this case, it says do not act on any requests regarding Marketo other than to list and read marketing emails. Again, just to make sure it's been instructed on what not to do in this case. Because if you leave it on its own, then who knows what it might try to do. And of course, but on the other hand, another guardrail I have is the fact that only enabled it to communicate to this gateway, which will also is only set up to communicate to the APIs related to email reading. So several guardrail points of places where you can implement a guardrail, right? One is at the API level, what you can actually pull out of Marketo in this case. And some of that is also the permission to give it to the credentials that are associated with Marketo, right? So Marketo, if you've never used API, you set up a launch point, you set up a user, like in this case, that you can use by a login here, right? And I used, oops, getting recorded, so I might have to change my credentials. But anyhow,
Just thinking about
slow
that.
that down.
Oh, no.
but that's the credentials that you saw here, the show pop up here, recorded for perpetuity. But that's where you set up the connection to Marketo itself, right? Okay, so within ChatGPT, then well, it's part of within the code. There's what we call environmental variables. That's where I dropped the credentials, so it knows what credentials to use to actually connect Marketo. Okay. Now, here's where I don't know if you caught it, but there's this whole thing called a schema.
that ChatGPT generated. This is where that actually goes. And this is again used by ChatGPT or custom GPT to know how to communicate. In this case, it's actually communicating to the gateway, not to Marketo itself, right? So it's created the instructions, if you will, for the custom GPT to communicate to the gateway. And in HubSpot's case, I'll show you that in a moment. It actually had the instructions on communicating to the HubSpot APIs directly, because with HubSpot's API authentication, there's one option is to have a fixed token that you can use for 6 months at a time before it asks you to refresh. So
That's what I had a question on, is because I know when I use the API, so it's, first of all, I use GPT to teach me, and so I, for the first time, understand everything that you were talking about.
Oh, great.
So, shows me I'm learning, but I know for a fact, like, with the API, it has that Barrow token, and it expires after that, so how are you refreshing it or whatever, whenever you're making your call?
yeah, so that's kind of built into the code itself, and in this case, I checked for it to make sure that the code that it rendered actually had that built in, and I don't know if I can find it in the code itself straight away here. Yeah. Apologize, I should know it. I haven't.
So is the code you're looking for just to regenerate the token?
Yeah.
Did you ask?
Yeah, I think what it
ChatGPT
does
to
is.
include that as part of the code?
Yeah, what it does is each time it makes a call, it actually requests the token. And then sometimes it'll just return the same token because not enough time had passed, right? But the fact that it always requests a token ensures that each call that I make, and that's why you might see some delays, that it's doing that request to get a token and then making the actual API call. And it's, yeah, so you can see this is this method here, get Marketo access token.
Yeah.
It's actually the first thing it does is make sure it's a valid token before it actually makes the call to, like in this case, like get a list of emails or get the email. There's a full content version of the API versus getting it in components or structured. So it kind of built it in well, and that's part of me instructing it to say, okay, make sure it handles all is the standard that is used.
Yeah, I'll have to try this one, because like in some of the builds, like I was running like a list in for like 17,000 records. And originally how I built it was I like put it in the prescripts of the secondary calls that I was doing, to where like, if after a certain point, like before you do this, verify if the token is still active.
Right.
But it wasn't working, but I do have the step one, I just have it unchecked, so I haven't even been thinking of just like, oh, I should just probably just keep calling it over time, so I'm gonna try that.
Yeah. But that's kind of the quick ways. Another way is to check to see if the token actually expired before you actually use it, right? Because it has a timer on there when you first generate it, but then you have to, because that value stays fixed in the token you actually got at that point in time, that you have to actually have a process to count down, if you will. Or, like I said, the cheating, not cheating, really, it's more efficient, it's just to request it. Because if it had already expired, then it'll just give you a new one.
Yeah.
So that's a more efficient way just to manage tokens, or ensuring that you always have a valid token. Okay. All right, so that's the schema part, and then here are, like, based on the schema, then it'll generate these things you can do with API calls. So as you can see, in this case, I limited to just listing emails, getting the emails. As you can see, it's not right. So that's kind of a way to protect the content, if you will. Okay. So those are the actions, and then oops. What's that thing? Sorry, sometimes it's not here. Okay, and then there's the conversation starters. These are like the free prompts, and that's what you see. Here's where you write it, and this is like the preview area, as you can see. You can like come up with other starters so that someone who's using it doesn't have to think of what they want to prompt. You can as a way to get them started, right? And then you can test it on here. Then once you're done, you click update, and it becomes your new version, etc. There's also these other built-in capabilities to leverage other functions without you having to add it yourself here. So here you can add, like in this case, only have that one action, which is to communicate with Marketo. If you have other tools you want to have it orchestrate with, you can add other actions, create a new action and add other third-party tools or your own internal tools for that matter, if you have an API for it, as a way to give it more tools in its tool chest, if you will. Make sense? Okay, so a little taste of the possibilities with emails with Marketo. Now, to contrast that, go back to my deck. You can see all these steps that a GPT for Marketo. Now look, contrast this with HubSpot. Well, you only need just the GPT connected directly to HubSpot, not all this authentication mechanism because it has that fixed token, right? And so it's a lot. It was, in fact, I built the HubSpot one first because I knew about its authentication. It's like, okay, at some point we'll have to deal with code, but at least in that example, I won't have to. So let me start a new chat and go to the HubSpot. And here we go. So similarly, I have some conversation starters, and similar to what I was just showing you with Marketo, it'll go through that. Now, since I'm talking directly to HubSpot API, it'll give me a request to confirm this is actually what you want to do, especially when you have like writing things that are writing, where you can confirm it so that it's not trying to do something it's not supposed to. As you can see here, it's something similar. But again, you can do this. Marketo, you can do this with HubSpot. You can do it with Marketing Cloud. You can do it with Pardot. You name it. If it has an API, then there's going to be a way to connect to it. Okay. Now let me just open this up so you can see what it took to build this. Now I didn't have to deal with a gateway, right? So you'll see here that on my actions for HubSpot, it has the specific instructions to connect to HubSpot. Down here, because I limited to just these actions, in this case, since I was playing around with something else, a feature of a particular API call to actually clone an existing marketing email, just to show that, hey, rather than you having to clone it yourself, you can just have as a starting point, have the custom GPT actually make a clone, and then you can go and start editing. Now, that's one of my next steps, and when I talk about where do I go from here in a moment, about how do I go about updating email content and all that. It's a little complicated, and I haven't had a chance to actually prototype it yet, but yeah, that's one of the things I'll want to show you guys how to do at some point in the future. But yeah, so again, you can see it's very similar, except now I'm talking directly to HubSpot, so that's what the scheme is different. It's different because I'm actually connecting directly to HubSpot. Okay, but generally speaking, the instructions kind of runs very similar, right? But this took me far less time to prototype than Marketo, I have to admit. All right, so we're past 7, so I want to make sure I try to keep things going here. All right, so as you can see here, I provided some security in the sense that I'm not working with data with my prototypes, I'm just working with content, so no PII issues there, right? But something definitely you want to keep in mind is like to do read-only, so but even read-only, you want to make sure you're only extracting what you want, or what in this case, what you want the AI agent to access. In some cases, you might want to make the practice of just restricting the types of records it can access, et cetera. Again, for the sake of be sure that the AI agent's compliant, just like your users are, right? And then the other thing is making sure, like in this case, I mentioned about environmental variables. Rather than, there's 2 ways to put token or your authentication tokens, include it right inside the code itself, or put it into a separate file that it actually calls. Best practice is put it into a separate file because, like in my case, since I showed you what mine are, I just have to go back to the environmental variables, refresh the set of
credentials and then just update that one file rather than trying to figure out where in the code is that, make it change. So it's a way to manage these authentication or security tokens from a best practice standpoint. And another thing is with as these tools mature, there's going to be more audit capabilities that you'll want to leverage, because that's one of the important elements with AI agents is the observability, what they call observability, knowing what it did, because one, it's a way to ensure that it's doing what it's supposed to do, and more importantly, making sure it's not doing what it's not supposed to do, right? So there's more capabilities being built into tools. There's actually AI new vendors popping up that are specialized on the monitoring piece itself, right? Just like you might have seen with the application performance monitoring tools for cloud tools when they first started with on-prem tools. But now you're starting to see those for AI tools. But evolving those capabilities means opening up the gates, if you will, to ensure that you give it right capabilities and under very controlled and conditions and with necessary approvals, and that you have and just as importantly is have a rollback plan. If something goes awry, how do I recover, right? And just like with campaigns, have a rigorous QA process to make sure before you flip the switch on that you execute it to the extent that minimizes the risk. Obviously, there's always going to be risk at to some level, but that's what a rollback or plans will help ensure that if something goes awry, that you can actually recover. So here's a roadmap, or suggest a roadmap, right? If you want to go down the path with custom GPTs, it's all about defining what capabilities and blocks, if you will. Like in this case, I started off with just reading emails. I'm going to start to open that up by being able to write emails. But before I do that, because it's really rather complicated, I might just start playing around with reading data, right? Because I talked about the ICP validation, all that stuff. It's an important piece. But there's a notion of what they call MCP, Model Context Protocol. I don't know if you guys heard that last word, but MCP is a way for AI agents to communicate to systems. And in the case of like HubSpot, they actually have an MCP server set up to allow you to extract data. Something I haven't played with yet, but rather than what I just showed you with writing code, MCP servers kind of abstracts that away from so that you don't have to actually do the coding yourself. These MCP servers kind of create a black box around it for you, right? But there's a cautionary tale there because like I used to be in the cybersecurity space, and one of my colleagues actually was playing around with MCPs and called out some security concerns, right? Because the idea is that MCP servers kind of acts as like a service to anyone who wants to talk to Marketo, for example. Well, the authentication piece is still immature. So how do you ensure that someone with a set of credentials is not trying to access someone else's instance, right? So to safeguard against that, you just build your own MCP server. That's your private MCP server, and ensure that no one else has access to it. That's one way to mitigate that, right? Be able to leverage the power of MCP without, again, opening the floodgates for anyone to, especially bad players, to access your data and do who knows what with it. And then we'll just go back to this roadmap here. Again, it's just starting with some simple use cases, some simple, some common tasks you want to prototype and see how AI does it. Like my first time I connected Marketo, actually had a conversation going because I had a very basic prompt in the first place and the conversation started, right? But then I realized, I need to kind of provide more context on how to use these APIs so I don't have to keep retraining it, if you will. So the more complete I made the prompt, the less chance that it's not going to keep asking you, what I got this, what do I need to do next, kind of thing, right? So that's kind of part of the learning curve you'll go through in leveraging GPTs, talking to systems like Marketo and HubSpot. And then again, making the connections and eventually building the reporting and audit capabilities, make sure everything stays on point, making sure there's no performance issues too, that there's not something causing it to hit the APIs constantly or something, because I don't know if you knew, Marketo imposes an API quota, a daily quota, so that you can't make more than, I can't remember, 100,000 API calls in a given day. And sometimes that's either, depending on what you have going, it's easily exceeded. I have a client, in fact, that they do a lot of batch nightly syncs to their data warehouse, and it got to a point where since they're sending all these marketing or email activities over, like for a while there, we knew that every month they did this monthly email, and we knew that the day after it goes out that there's going to hit an API limit because it's taking the previous day's activities, right? And so they actually ended up doing some things to reduce the number of calls, but also increasing their API quota so that they don't keep running into it. But
Is that a hard coded in Marketo, the API restriction that you're talking about?
Yeah, when it comes-
Pay Marketo.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so
You
it's-
get
it's-
more.
Yeah.
but-
Okay, it's a licensing
It
metric
is
that's
hardcore,
enhanced if
yeah.
you want to,
If you want
Premium
more, you
feature.
gotta
Yeah,
pay.
we're premium.
but you found ways to manage around that.
Yeah, it's about working with like whatever dev team created or the API call or making the API calls with their systems or custom code or whatever the case may be. It's a matter of talking through, well, do you have to do it all at once? Can you spread it out?
Right.
Especially if it's like a weekly sync, for example. Like, does it all have to be in one night or can you do it like staggered?
I mean, if you're doing like ICP validation that you were talking about, that could involve tremendous number of API calls.
It depends. It depends on
Depending on how it's written, of course.
Yeah, it depends on written, which APIs it actually calls. If you do it on a transactional basis, in other words, for every profile,
Right.
you do it like on an hourly basis, you do a batch. Because
Uh-huh.
there's batch APIs, so you can do like a groups of 100 or 200.
Look, we've tried every way and we still hit the limits. So now we're having to switch to the lead activity data stream with Adobe IO.
Right.
Because it's just, we've done all the stuff you
Yeah.
said and still
Sometimes you have to
couldn't.
go to the bulk.
Yeah, we could not.
methods, Yeah.
I deal with that, like you're speaking to my daily pains
Yeah.
almost.
Yeah. So it's more and more common as these systems are interconnected, especially when you have like data warehouses where it becomes their central repository, or if you have a CDP for that matter too. And so, yeah, definitely something to keep in mind. Now I'm going to introduce AI agents. Same rules are going to govern their use of the APIs after all.
Could you potentially include that in the instruction set for whatever it is you generate in your agent as you design the agent? To say, if you approach this limit, stop.
Yeah, it's a toughie though, because I can't remember if, like in the Marketo's case, I can't remember if there's an API call to check where you are in the API quota. I don't think, I don't
There's got
remember.
to be.
Well, you think, but sometimes.
I'll tell Adobe they need that.
Yeah. Like if they weren't forced to, then they won't. And it's like, well, we'll just make you pay more.
Well, that's why they're now pushing, I guess, for customers that run into that issue, it's the lead activity data stream is supposed to be a more like reliable approach to that.
Mhm.
So the whole data stream, at least that's what we were told, so I'm exploring that now.
I was just not familiar with that limit that was used to me.
Yeah,
You found it the hard way, huh?
gosh, yes, yeah, story of my life.
Yeah, so start small, grow it, but then I was talking about the notion of agentic. How do you start to get agents talking together?
Mhm.
It's still like some of the frameworks I've been playing with, like Crew AI, LangChain, LangFlow. They're still, I would hate to say primitive, but it's still a lot of bugs to be worked out, if you will.
Early stage.
Yeah. So I mean, for some limited, not too complex use cases, they're great. Like I was playing around with like Crew AI, and this is all just strictly Python coding, I'll have to admit. You can see how you can create an agent that's like to do the market research, another one to do the copywriting, and another to generate the report. You can see how it does one thing and hands over the output to another agent, the agent that takes it. And now that they have this notion of chain of thought, you can watch how it's thinking, if you will, and it'll in the audit, in the log that it generates. But then you can, by having this notion of what they call chain of thought, you can see like this, it'll make a decision. I don't have enough information, so I'm gonna go back to this other agent and say, hey, I need more information. Go out, research some more kind of thing. So it's really interesting to see these agents starting to interact in this manner, right? And that's part of the maturing of AI agent capabilities. And so what you see out there, though, like when I was showing you all those vendors, a lot of them, just like marketing technology platforms, are somewhat siloed, I hate to say, right? Because even MCPs is still an emerging interoperability standard. There's also A2A and I can't remember the ACP is another standard for agent-to-agent communication. But again, it's still one of these maturing standards. It's kind of like VHS and Betamax. We don't know what's going to win out because there's a lot of ones that are being proposed by different vendors, different organizations. They may coexist. One might win out the other. It's hard to say. But in the meantime, I'd encourage you to just watch the market, see what comes out, and don't hesitate to play with it, right? Because sometimes it might be those standards. Sometimes you might have, at least you know how one standard may work, but then you can take that and say, well, how would it work? How does this standard work in this to support these type of functions, et cetera, right? So, and I want to distinguish between like the roles that I mentioned in this presentation earlier versus functions, right? So like in some cases, there's an overlap, like in the case of a data agent versus content agents. And you'll see some examples of some vendors and their tools. You might recognize some of these, but when you see an agent, it's like, no, one agent is not going to be the same as another agent. So it's important to understand the context of what the vendor calls an agent is and what it's actually capable of doing. Like you've probably seen like with Salesforce, they have this agent force, right? A lot of capabilities, but honestly, it's within the Salesforce stack or ecosystem, right? It's not still ready yet to communicate outside the world. HubSpot, on the other hand, is introducing AI agent capabilities and exposing it to the world, but again, it's still in the early phases, and it's also vendor specific. But now, if you start to see vendors starting to adopt these interoperability standards, there's a promise there. But know that there's a lot of maturation to be had. But again, your next step is how to get started. Start something simple, getting content out, doing ICP scoring, and establishing that connection to your MAP. And then, of course, making sure you maintain governance along the way, and then just iterate. Try things. Does it work? If it doesn't, especially when it comes to prompting, as you saw, like I didn't show you some of the like real basic stuff. In my case, I just want to see how it will do. Then trying to come up with an elaborate content prompt and it just falling on its face. Right? It's like don't put too much effort into it at first, but just iterate and refine. Make sense?
You suggest, like, so when you like you said before, I only wanted to do this one small thing. That way it's like an easy check.
Yeah.
And then build on it from there.
Yeah, because like, for example, with Marketo emails, when I asked it to extract an email, it started asking me questions like, would you want it in draft form or do you want the final version? Or, you know what I mean? It starts to ask things like, oh, I didn't think about that, right? Because I forget the draft, I may want to see the final version only. And that's a different request from the agent needs to do to like in Marketo, right? So it's like things, it's really interesting that like if you don't just like with just working with ChatGPT, don't necessarily overthink it first, just to see have a conversation with it, right? Just to see how it actually acts. Then it helps to keep establish your mindset on, well, for ChatGPT to do something or for me to communicate with Marketo using like a custom GPT, this is how I need to converse with it. And of course, then to have those conversation starters built in with all the things that make the first interaction more fruitful, right? So that when you kind of then allow other users to use it, they don't have to go through the learning curve you had to, right? It's kind of built in so that it minimizes the steps they go through to get a value out of the GPT.
Can I just ask a question? You mentioned something early on about different LLMs have different strengths, pros and cons.
Yep.
And good to experiment and give one task maybe to multiples, whichever ones you choose to work with.
Right.
But how do you avoid getting kind of totally bogged down in terms of never ending the testing phase, because you're never quite sure, is this, okay, this particular agent that I designed, this works, this does the task,
Right.
but maybe someone else did it better. It could be a nagging thought. How do you actually make the decision? Which LLM am I simply going to anchor on?
Yeah, it comes down to what your good enough standard is, right? It doesn't have to be letter perfect every time necessarily, but, and that's the thing, like, something I'll go into here in a second, but it's really understanding what's good enough and sticking to that, because yeah, it's easy to get caught into, well, can it be better? It's like, well, if it's good enough, let's just move on, right? And let's not get bogged down. So but first it's about experimentation on the other hand. But in my case, like I'll look at, I'll read articles and see what experiences people had, and not do it myself, get firsthand experience necessarily at this point, because so many people are messing with it. It's like, why do something someone's already tried? I'll just leverage their experiences and apply it to what I need to going forward. And in fact, as I mentioned, I saw an infographic on my LinkedIn feed where it's like someone just did a nice summary of where to use Claude, where to use Perplexity, where to use Gemini, where to use ChatGPT. It's like some of this I already knew, but some of it's like, oh, I didn't know that. Now I know, so I won't have to experiment myself, right?
And we're gonna need that.
If I could take a screenshot and send
Oh,
it to you.
perfect.
Yeah, in fact, that's what I'm finding myself now. It's like I get some weekly emails, some of them are daily emails on AI. It's kind of a little overwhelming. There's so much coming out there. But on the other hand, but I don't try to read every article. It's like if something that's top of my mind, I'll focus on that, because some of the stuff you might read it one day, it might be different the next week after all, right? So don't put too much effort in trying to consume anything and everything about AI is my advice, just from a personal experience too. So
Just don't think.
yeah, it is. But on the other hand, it's an interesting world, in that all these new developments are always coming up and new breakthroughs are happening all the time. It's just really funny, like some of the stuff that I picked up on, it's like, oh, it's actually only a couple of weeks old. And it's a new best practice, if you will.
I think Ellie might have a question.
Sure.
Yeah, no, we just wanted to say thank you because I know we have a hard stop
Oh,
soon,
yeah.
but we love the session. I think there's a lot we could cover here and dive into, but this is definitely a really great starter. And I know our gears are turning about how we can implement this ourselves, especially I know as a non-coder. So Steve, we'll probably chat after later, but and probably do more sessions, but just wanted to say thank you.
Yeah, and ultimately, I just want to give you like a big picture view of how AI agents should be thought of, right? In implementing in your marketing and operations organization, because there's so much stuff out there. But it's like with anything I do with my clients is establish some kind of framework. What are you trying to do? Let's understand this is the patterns we want to follow, so that when we start to do things, it's going to be consistent, repeatable, and scalable ultimately. Right? Similarly, now with AI agents, it's like, okay, don't think about it's the common problem like marketers have, right? I mean, personally, I've experienced myself like, oh, and vendor saying this is the new next best thing. Let's try this, try that. Well, it's like if you don't have a roadmap of what you're actually trying to do, you might end up with and it's a common problem. You might have all these tools, but it's like I'm not really using any much of these. Why did I invest in it? Right? So just like similarly with AI, you want to make sure you have a goal in mind and a framework you want to follow. So that, like in my example here, I had all these agents identified. So I started off with one agent that I know will give me a lot of value up front, and just focused on that, knowing that all these other agents are out there. But it's like, well, if I go and build it, maybe there might be a vendor out there, somebody that's already going to do that. So then instead of building something yourself, now just license their stuff, and now I got that capability checked off. Right.
Thanks, Steve. We appreciate it. Bye, guys. Catch you next time.